Okay, so I didn't grow up in Toronto, didn't grow up in the city at all. I grew up in the countryside, about 2.5 hours southwest of here, Huron County, and which means that I didn't know a lot of things that people that grow up in the city might know. One of them being, I didn't see a lot of poverty, out in the open. You didn't see homeless people, you didn't see anything like that where I grew up. And one of the other things about growing up in the country was that I had a friend who we called Bubba. And Bubba, his family ran the town's funeral home. And I'll never forget the first time that Bubba looked at me and said, "Chris, how many people do you think will come to your funeral?" And that's kind of weird, man. But I realized that was how he gauged a life well lived. He had spent his life, in awe of these never-ending visitations that would happen, where cars would be lined up down the street and right out of our small town and off into the cornfield. And people would wait for hours to pay their respects. And, those people that had those sorts of funerals to Bubba, and I guess to many others, you would say that they touched people. They were part of something. They meant something to people. They had a good life. And maybe. And I was thinking about this as I walked into a community center in Vancouver's downtown east side. It was a small room, only about half full, and most of the people there seemed to be only interested in the free pizza that was being offered. There was a slideshow at the back of the room, and it was a slideshow, but it was basically just 4 pictures of this kind of pudgy-faced black man who seemed to always be frowning at the camera. And, his clothes were sometimes a couple sizes too big and a little bit ragged, but other than that, you wouldn't have been able to tell from the photos that he'd lived most of the past few years completely homeless. So once the pizza was finished, we were all told to take a seat, and there was a microphone in the front of the room, and they said, people could come up, say a few words, you could say what you wanted about the deceased, and everyone just sat there, and it was really awkward, and more than that, it was just sad, and I wanted, you feel that urge, like you want to go up and do something, you want to say something. But I couldn't, I didn't know the guy. To be honest, I wasn't even there to pay my respects. I was there to learn Swahili. So let me back up and tell you how I got here. I recently, before that, I had been accepted. I'd gotten a job with Journalists for Human Rights, and the gig was that I'd go abroad, and even though I'm not sure how much I know about journalism myself, but I was going to go and train young journalists and get them to do more, or try to get them to do more human rights reporting. And when I applied, I thought that I'd be going to Ghana, because that's where their program had been before in the past. And when I got accepted, I found out that I was going to Tanzania, which is a Swahili-speaking country. And I'd be working at the largest newspaper in the country, which was a Swahili language newspaper with Swahili-speaking journalists, who I was supposed to train and critique and everything. And it is a bit ridiculous, but it's not as ridiculous as it might sound. A lot of them did speak English, and I also speak some Swahili, or I did at the time speak some Swahili, like all of you do, I'm sure. Everyone knows that Simba means lion, right? Right? And Rafiki means friend. And Hakuna Matata, no worries, right? But I was worried, because that was, other than The Lion King, I didn't know anything, and I wasn't going to be able to read and critique a newspaper in Swahili. But I was undeterred, and I was ambitious. So I went online, I went to Google and quickly typed in "learn Swahili in Vancouver." And much to my surprise, the first thing that came up really quickly was the Metro Vancouver Swahili Cultural Center. And I couldn't believe my luck that this actually existed. And even luckier was that it was a couple blocks away from where I lived. The only concern I had, the only worry, was that it was a couple blocks from where I lived. I lived just off of East Hastings in the downtown east side, or just off of the downtown east side. Now, for those of you, I know you Toronto people don't get out very often, but for those that haven't heard of Vancouver, haven't been to Vancouver, don't know, Vancouver is a beautiful city, maybe one of the most beautiful in the world. But there's this area, the downtown east side, and it's I think the most shocking thing about it is just its proximity to the downtown core, and like just how it's surrounded, like so much poverty is surrounded by so much wealth, and like it's to the extent that if you're walking through quaint touristy Gastown and you go one block too far, you're suddenly in Skid Row, or on a number of buses, it feels like you literally blink and you go from watching men and women in suits and upscale restaurants and glass-covered skyscrapers to people with obvious mental illness who are shooting up and soliciting on the street out in the open, all right there, and it can be kind of shocking. And after a few years in Vancouver, I did both my undergrad and my master's in Vancouver, and had been living there for some time. And even after all that time, I didn't know really why it existed like that, why that place was the way it was, or what to think about it. Like, obviously, in a developed nation, those problems shouldn't exist. Like, people should be getting more help than they're obviously getting, and that place shouldn't exist. But at the same time, it's kind of nice. Like, if those problems are going to exist, then it's nice that there's a place where marginalized people can go and receive much needed services and do their thing. And it seems to me that it's almost better to be out in the open rather than dispersed and swept under the rug and out of sight, out of mind. But whatever it is, good or bad, it is definitely a community down there. But despite the fact that I live just on the edge in this little neighborhood called Strathcona, which is like a little oasis on the edge of the downtown east side, I walk through it every day. Like, I still wasn't part of that community. But regardless of where the Swahili Cultural Center was, they taught Swahili. I need to learn Swahili, so I was going. So I sent them an email, and a guy named John got back to me and told me to come in the next day, so I did. And I learned a number of things from my Swahili lessons. Many of them not Swahili, but for example, I learned that in Tanzania there's a very loose sense of time, a different sense of time, which means that you're often left waiting when you have a meeting, And I also learned that you have to be ready for anything. You shouldn't really be surprised. So the first time I arrived, I found that the cultural center was actually a small office in an old, what seemed to be abandoned office building. And the door was locked and no one was there. And I waited 15 minutes and finally phoned the number that John had given me in his email. And before I had a chance to say much of anything, the voice on the other end just started screaming. He said, no, not today. My friend has been murdered. He was beaten. No, maybe tomorrow. And I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. And I said, I'm sorry. Like, if you need to take some time, it's not a problem. And his voice completely changed. He said, oh, no, Chris. Oh, Chris, of course. Yeah. No, tomorrow. It'll be okay. Tomorrow. We'll see you then. Okay, John. So tomorrow, the next day, I show up, and the door's locked again, and I call John, and he assures me he's on his way. So an hour later, there he is, and he's very, very impressive looking. Like, he's wearing a suit and polished shoes and everything else, very businesslike, and he kind of brushed off my condolences and got straight to business. And John is, he quickly told me, a master of languages. Like, heavily accented English. He tells me that he speaks at least a dozen, and he's also figured out how to teach them. And I told him, I'm going to Tanzania in a few weeks. He says, that's not a problem. You'll be fluent. You'll be fluent by the time you go. And, I didn't have to take his word for it. He reached into his briefcase and he brought out this invoice. And he explained to me that he had just gotten back from Ottawa and they'd flown him there. And he had been brought in to teach a diplomat how to speak Swahili, a Canadian diplomat that was going to Tanzania. And the invoice said $4,000 for this week he'd spent teaching. And I was a little bit concerned, not because I doubted his miraculous teaching abilities. It's like a living Rosetta Stone. I knew that I couldn't afford $4,000 a week. And I told him this, and he said, that's no problem, it's okay, there's a diplomat price, and then there's a student price. I said, well, how much is a student price? And he says, well, how much are you willing to pay? And all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, we're bargaining, and I'm not good at bargaining. But this is something that I need to learn in Tanzania. In Tanzania, you're gonna be bargaining. So I think real hard, and I think, what's a fair price? And I think, well, $20 an hour, that's a good price for lessons, but maybe it's too low. Like he's obviously incredible, and I don't want to insult him. So I just kind of sit there in silence and fidget in my chair, and this is my strategy, my bargaining strategy. And finally, thankfully, he says, $50 an hour, and that's way too high. So I countered with, okay. And when you've made a great deal, when the guy you're bargaining with jumps up and grabs a contract and gets you to sign really quickly before you can change your mind. So once I signed this paper, I was informed that John, the world's greatest Swahili teacher, was going to be out of town for the next few weeks. But he had a friend also named John, conveniently, so I wouldn't get confused, who could teach me, and he was also a pretty good teacher, so that was good. Now, other John he was also from Tanzania, also a Tanzanian immigrant, and he had adapted to life in Canada a little bit differently from business John. He wore jeans and t-shirts and ball caps, and when I first met him, he said, "Yo, man, what's up?" And I responded, because I'm a bit of a brown noser. I was studying at home, I wanted to be ready for my lessons. So I said, "Ujambo bwana." And when he was done laughing, he informed me that no one says that, really. It's the equivalent of, "Good day, good sir." And it's in movies, they say it in Kenya, but it's embarrassing. So he said, what you should be saying in a greeting is habari gani, but most people say mambo or vipi or mambo vipi, and which means kind of like what's up. And the response is poa, which means cool. So Cool John, when he showed up for our first Swahili lesson, he was of course late, and when he arrived half an hour later, he realized he had forgotten the keys to the office. So he suggested we go down to the Carnegie Center, the Carnegie building. And I thought, I've never been to this Carnegie building, but it sounds great, Carnegie Hall, practice. And so we walk off, and it turns out that the Carnegie Community Center is a building on the corner of Main and Hastings, which is the epicenter of the downtown east side, and a building I'd walked by a number of times, but never really given a second thought to. But when I walked inside, it was incredible. Like inside there was a big group of men playing the most intense game of chess that I'd ever seen. Like there was screaming that there was going to be blood. Like it was a good game. And then the staff were incredibly patient and nice. And every time someone ran in demanding an ambulance, they were helping out, and it happened quite a few times. And then there was there was a room off in the back, like a kind of library where people were reading and lounging, and it was a nice space. But it was all full, so John suggested we go up to the soup kitchen upstairs to do our lesson. And so we went up there, and it was great. We continued learning about greetings, Tanzanian greetings, which are very important. And then we learned numbers as well, the number 1 to 1,000,000, because I'm a good student. And then afterwards he said, yeah, we should get some food. And I felt bad, like it was a soup kitchen, and I felt there was that feeling like I'm taking food out of someone else's mouth, but then at the same time I didn't want to be rude. So we went and had some food, and it was delicious. And I learned my first Swahili sentence, which was "I eat lunch," which in Swahili is a tongue twister. It's "Ninakula chakula mchana," mchana. Ninakula chakula cha mchana. I eat lunch. See, my Swahili's gotten much better. The second. So that was our first lesson. The second lesson, I show up. Cool John's nowhere in sight, and I find him in the park across the street, and he's talking to two young women in very tight, very short dresses in the middle of the day, kind of evening wear, and I say, hey, John, mam vipi? He said, po kaka, nie pojedzie. And he used some words that I didn't understand, so I just kind of stared at him for a while, and then he went back to his conversation with the women. And so I sat down, and one of the women was explaining in a kind of over-apologetic way that she'd had some trouble with the police recently. They had arrested her and shooken her down and taken her stash and her money, and it was a problem. And John, he was never really mad, but he was more serious than I'd ever seen him, and he just kind of sat there saying, "Oh, that's a problem. That's a problem." And I didn't know what the problem was exactly, but I was concerned. Not really concerned about that moment in time, sitting in the park, but concerned that I was going to arrive in Tanzania speaking Swahili like a pimp. It threw everything I'd learned into question. I don't know if Mambo VP, is that going to get me punched? I don't know. But later on, we did actually go back to the office and have our lesson, and it gets even better. We learn the days of the week and the months. And the months are really easy. It's just the word for moon, mwezi, and a number. So like first month, second month, or first moon, second moon. And but the problem is, like, mwezi, I mispronounced it the first time. I said mwezi, and he said, no, that means thief. And I said, oh, great, and I wrote it down in my book. I'm like, thief. If someone steals something from me, I can say mwezi. He's like, yes, and if there's people around, they'll catch them. And I said, perfect, that's awesome. And he said, yes, and then they'll beat him. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, everyone's had something stolen from them, so they usually take it out on the person that they can catch. And it's really not a laughing matter, because like a lot of people get killed this way, they get mob justice, they get beaten to death. And but now I was really worried, because I was going to show up speaking like a pimp and mispronounce the word for February and get 2 people killed or something. It was dangerous, Swahili. So if any of you are thinking of learning Swahili, you've been warned. Our third, we were supposed to have a number of classes, but John kind of, he would change our times or postpone, and I postponed a few classes as well. So we only ended up having about 3 classes, but the third one went exceptionally well. We went in there and we were going back and forth with the greetings. I'd say mambo, and he'd say poa vipi, and I'd say poa kaka, habari za familia, how's your family doing? And we asked about family and work and home and everything else, and everything was good. And it went on forever, just the same way that it does in Tanzania, so it was good. And by the end of it, he was really proud of me, and proud of himself, I think, because this may come as a surprise to you, but I may have been his first student. So he said, you're really good. And I said, oh, thank you. And he's like, no, man, you say asante sana. It means thank you. And I said, okay, asante sana. And he said, karibu, you're welcome. And it was very good. And I was about to go home and just thanking him, and he gave me some contacts for people to meet when I got to Tanzania. Like, one was a good Christian boy, he said, and the other one he's a city boy like me. And I was like, okay. And look that guy up. But before I left, he said, oh, and you should come to this memorial. a friend of mine, he passed away. We're having a memorial service for him. You should really come." And I said, "Well, thank you, Cool John, but that's just a little bit awkward. I don't know the guy, and I don't know if that would be right." He says, No, it'd be cool. You should come, and it'd be a great way to meet the Tanzanian community. You can practice your Swahili." And so there I am in this community center, and there's no Tanzanian community there. Cool John and Business John, who are both in attendance, are the only Tanzanians. This guy, the guy who passed away, this may come as a shock to you, but also named John. But he had a nickname because apparently everyone in Tanzania is named John. So they called him Moshi, which I think is probably the Swahili equivalent of Bubba. And it was great, after that awkward moment, finally, Pimp John, Cool John, he got up on stage and he said a few words about his friend Moshi, and after that it was like, the dams had broke. Like everybody, there's a lineup, everyone wanted to get up and say, he was my friend, I loved him, I missed him, and they tell a few stories. And from these stories, I really I started to feel like I knew this guy, this Moshi, he'd been in Canada for 18 years, and for whatever reason, I don't know if he came illegally, but he'd been homeless basically his entire time here, and he would just kind of depend on the kindness of friends for food and shelter. And whenever he outstayed his welcome, he would move on. And apparently he outstayed his welcome fairly quickly because he was a bit of a snorer. He was a prodigious snorer. And the other thing that everyone mentioned was that he liked to steal, like a lot. He was a bit of a Robin Hood character, and I liked him more and more. And any store that was stupid enough to let him inside, he would steal something from them. But he would never sell it for profit. He would only use what he needed, and then he would give the rest away, mostly to his friends. And one woman in particular, said, she really remembering this one day getting a knock at her door and seeing Moshi there, and he had remembered that it was her daughter's birthday, and he had stolen her like a really nice little pink tricycle. God knows where he'd gotten it, but he brought her this little tricycle, and this young girl who's probably from, not a very wealthy family, but she had this gift and this kind of godfather type figure looking out for her. And I thought that was great. And so I'm sitting there taking this all in and really feeling like I'm getting to know this guy. And there's a guy sitting next to me, kind of gray-haired, skinny, older gentleman, and the type of guy you might expect to see begging for change outside of a liquor store. And he was weeping, and he kind of saw that I was a bit choked up as well, and he offered me his flask. He's like, "Here, have a drink." And I said, "Well, no, thank you. I don't know what you have in there." But no, he insisted, and he said, "No, have a drink, for our friend Moshi." And so I took a drink for my friend Moshi. Asante sana.